ASAP Nation.
Junwoo wakes up alone in his family's upper floor flat, where he finds a message from his mother warning him that the rest of the family has left and that there isn't much food in the cupboard. Junwoo starts up a computer game and starts streaming. His gaming is interrupted when his playmates bring up something from the news. Junwoo checks the news and sees a large number of violent behaviors and assaults have been reported. As he watches the news, he hears the commotion from outside and sees people running screaming and some people violently biting and scratching one another. Junwoo is attacked by a neighbor who starts snarling and yelling. Junwoo fights hard and manages to shove his neighbor out the door, where he is feasted on by an infected guy. Junwoo barricades the door with his refrigerator and watches the news. He receives messages from his mother and learns that they are hiding as well, but he can't contact them because the reception has gone out. He rations what food he has left and prepares to hold out the next day. Junwoo then chooses to post a snapshot of his current location on social media in the hopes that someone will notice. He straps his phone to a small drone and attempts to fly it up in the air in the hopes of receiving reception. This plan fails since his drone's battery is depleted. Junwoo sees a police officer running through the streets fighting off the infected but is quickly overcome. Junwoo tries calling out to the police officer but is unable to assist. He hears incoming from the barricaded door and sees that an infected has made it in. The infected tries to push the refrigerator barricade and Jun is forced to climb out to the balcony to escape the pursuing infected. After a few days, Junwoo resorts to drinking liquor to stay hydrated. He learns from the news that the infected have retained some intelligence, able to perform simple tasks such as opening doors, and some have even been reported to remember skills acquired from their profession. Junwoo dances around drunk on RAM, hallucinating seeing his family return from their trip and hugging his mother. He snaps out of his daze and breaks down crying. He later tries to get reception by placing his smartphone at the end of a selfie stick and extending it out the balcony. He reaches out and finally gets a voice message from his family. He plays the message and discovers that his mother, father, and sister are all together sheltering at his father's workplace. He becomes further upset as the message slowly turns into anguish and fear as his family get eaten alive and die at the hands of the infected. Not knowing what else to do, Jun grabs a golf club and attacks the corridor full of infected, swearing and shouting at them as he attempts to bash as many of them as he can. The racket attracts more infected in. Jun is swiftly overpowered. He comes back to his senses and understands he must return. He sneaks past a few infected people in the hallway, but is able to get back to his apartment. On day 20, he observes explosions in the metropolis region, and the power and water go out, leaving him with no food, no water, and no family. Junwoo decides to end his life by making a noose out of wires and hanging himself in the living room. As he chokes, he notices a laser light shining at him from an apartment in the building next door. He tries to free himself from the noose but eventually falls to the floor. He rushes to the window and sees a woman looking at him through binoculars. He waves at her and she waves back. All of a sudden she hears a noise outside her hallway and prepares to activate an improvised trap she built in case the infected broke through her door. The noise subsides and she falls asleep. Junwoo wakes up the following morning looking for Yubin. They exchange names by showing it through their mobile devices. They're interrupted when an infected enters Yubin's apartment. It gets caught in her trap and she quickly dispatches of it with an axe. The next day Yubin sees that Junwoo is hungry and tries to throw a rope across to his apartment. It falls to the street in the middle of a crowd of infected. Jun sees this and gets his drone and flies rope to Yubin's apartment with a physical connection. Yubin then sends food to Junwoo and he thanks her. While he eats he sees the rope Yubin threw earlier, and an infected fireman using it to climb up. As the fireman pulls the table, the rope is attached to flies across the room hitting Yubin and knocking her out. Junwoo scatters to get his drone to fly out and knock the fireman off of the rope. He tries his best to distract the infected fireman but the drone gets smashed into pieces. Just as the fireman reaches Yubin's balcony, she shows up and cuts his hand off with an axe. Later that night Junwoo heads out to his neighbor in search of food and supplies. He makes it to the next door apartment and finds supplies like climbing equipment and camping gear. Just as he's picking up the food his neighbor attacks and a struggle takes place. Junwoo fights back and manages to escape from the apartment. He got more food, water and some supplies including a pair of walkie-talkies. He sends one to Yubin via the rope connection. The two start using the walkie-talkies as a means of communication. The pair share a meal together with Yubin paying attention to the fact that they like the same food. Junwoo thanks Yubin for saving his life. Yubin refuses to take credit, saying that she didn't save his life and that he actually saved his own life with his decision to survive. We find out that Yubin had also attempted to take her own life. We see a broken noose hanging from her ceiling. A few days later, and the horde of infected on the streets start running and enter their buildings. The infected run through the corridors searching for any survivors. Yubin sees that the 8th floor in Junwoo's building is the quietest and decide that would be the best place to go. Yubin goes to the streets and finds a gun. She fights off the infected and is almost overrun, but Junwoo appears and the two head to the 8th floor together. On the 8th floor, they come across a group of infected and get cornered at the end of a hallway. Luckily, a door opens and a man appears, rescuing them from the infected. They go into his apartment and share a meal. He informs them that he heard talks of rescue teams over the radio and that they'll be rescued soon. As they eat, Yubin sees a picture of a couple and their child. She also sees milk bottles but doesn't see any signs of a child. She asks the man where his kid is, but the man says he doesn't have one. Junwoo faints and Yubin realizes they have been drugged and that the man isn't who he claims to be. The man gets up and drags a drugged Yubin to a room where his infected wife awaits. The man thanks them for coming as his wife had been starving for days. He traps Yubin with his wife and holds the door locked. Junwoo gets up, points the gun at the man and threatens to shoot if he doesn't let Yubin go. The man lets go of a rope holding back his wife, and Jun quickly dives for the rope and drops his gun in the process. Yubin is heard screaming while the man bargains with Junwoo, saying he let him live as long as Yubin remains. The screaming inside the room stops and Jun assumes the worst. The man unlocks the door and opens it. Yubin comes out, covering the infected wife's face with a blanket. She lets it loose on the man and his infected wife bites his neck. Yubin then shoots them both, but the gunshots attract the horde of infected. With no hope in sight, Yubin decides that they should end their lives before the horde arrives and eats them alive. Junwoo complies and forces himself to aim the gun at Yubin. Just as he's about to pull the trigger, they hear helicopters passing by. They quickly run up to the roof with the infected following them closely. The pair get cornered on the roof with nowhere to run. Just as the infected burst through the door, a helicopter comes on the scene and soldiers start shooting at the horde. The two quickly get on the helicopter and they fly away. As they fly out, Junwoo gets reception and finds out that a huge chunk of the metropolitan area is also infected, with an estimated 50,000 people. He also sees that many of the survivors have posted their pictures and locations on social media just like what he did, and that the rescue teams are using this information to search and rescue them.
Like, comment, subscribe.